Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the final virtual webinar training of 2020 hosted by the Mental Health Counselors of Central Florida. My name is Shannon Brown, and I am a graduate student at UCF and the student liaison with Mhccf. On behalf of the Mental Health Counselors of Central Florida, we are truly honored to have this opportunity to offer all of our presentations with you, and we will continue to share trainings over this valuable virtual modality as we continue to navigate the COVID-19 pandemic. Mhccf would like to encourage you to follow updates on the latest legislation for our field, including but not limited to laws, rules, and effective orders by going to mhccf.com. The Mental Health Counselors of Central Florida organization is currently an approved provider with CE Broker for the Florida Board of Mental Health Counseling, Marriage and Family Therapy, and Clinical Social Work. So, only clinicians pursuing continuing education units through the Florida 491 board will be processed. Please keep in mind that in order to qualify for CEUs for your viewing of this November 2020 presentation, you will be required to complete the post-presentation survey, which will only be sent to you via email if you have pre-registered for the event. The emailed survey will be accessible until November 30th, 2020, and an on-demand option will be available for members starting on December 1st of 2020, and it will remain active through the end of the year. Mhccf is hosting this extended on-demand option as a perk for our members, in addition to the free attendance of this webinar. Upon receiving your completed survey, we will be submitting this 1-hour CEU credit through CE Broker, and we will also be sending a certificate of completion to your email for your records. And now I'd like to introduce our presenter, Peggy Wegner, EDS. Peggy is a native Floridian who grew up in Orlando. She attended the University of Florida and received a bachelor's degree in criminal justice and 2 concurrent graduate degrees, a Master of Education and a Specialist of Education, which is a year longer than a typical master's degree, and in counselor education with a focus on community and agency counseling. Peggy is a licensed mental health counselor in Jacksonville, Florida, with over 30 years of experience. She was introduced to TRE, which is tension and trauma releasing exercises, in 2010, and became a certified TRE provider in 2017, and joined the TRE Mentor and Trainer program in 2020. Peggy will be highlighting TRE, stress less, and improve self-regulation skills. And so I'm so excited for this presentation, and I'm going to go ahead and hide myself and let Peggy take it away.
Thank you, Shannon. Thank you so much for letting me do this presentation with you and share a little bit about tension and trauma releasing exercises. It is one of the more exciting new tools that are available that I've been exposed to in a long time. And I hope that you will become equally excited about it. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that we can take a look. All right. So we are going to be talking about tension and trauma releasing exercises. And I always like to start with this quote, and I have no idea where it came from. The truth about our childhood, our experiences, is stored up in our body. And although we can repress it, we can never alter it. Our intellect can be deceived, our feelings manipulated, our perceptions confused, and our body tricked by medications. But someday, the body will present its bill, for it is as incorruptible as a child, who, still whole in spirit, will accept no compromises or excuses, and it will not stop tormenting us until we stop evading the truth. Part of why I love this quote is it captures what we believe as body integrated psychotherapists, of which I consider myself. That we know that the mind and body are not separated. We are one organism, and the body affects the mind in the same way the mind affects the body, that they are interactive. And TRE is one of those tools that I think helps address kind of the entire organism. So we've got several things we're going to try to accomplish in an hour, which is a short time. We are going to talk about the TRE process. I'd like to help you understand polyvagal theory and how the brain and body respond to trauma. We're going to review the limitations of typical treatment, as well as some of the advantages of TRE. And then we're going to understand how TRE impacts the nervous system and why that is a wonderful adjunct to the therapy that we traditionally do. So TRE is a set of 7 very simple exercises, and they activate a natural reflex mechanism in the body, which is trembling and shaking. And that trembling and shaking releases deep muscular tension, and it also helps calm down the nervous system. And that reflex is actually in all mammals. All mammals tremble, shake, and vibrate as part of their recovery from stress and tension. But human beings seem to be the ones who fight it and don't recognize it as valuable. TRE was developed by a gentleman by the name of David Berceli. Dr. Berceli tells a story of being in a bomb shelter with a village. So it was an entire group of people from small children to adults. And Dr. Berceli did a lot of work in traumatic circumstances, so war zones, post-tsunami, post-earthquake, those kinds of things. But he tells the story of being in a bomb shelter and watching everyone, regardless of age, that when the bombs dropped and percussed, everyone contracted the exact same way. So they pulled forward, right? They have that reaction to protect their core. So from babies all the way to the elderly. What he noticed, though, was he had children who were sitting on his lap, and he said they started shaking. And his response to his own feeling of shakiness was to contract so that he felt like he was presenting himself as very strong for these children. And he's observed that the other adults seemed to be doing the same thing. But that the children shook head to toe. And when the bombing stopped, their shaking continued, and then they seemed to relax. And then they were able to get up and just kind of go on. Whereas he and the other adults seemed to be kind of stuck in the contraction. And he says that that prompted some thought on his part of, well, what if that trembling was part of recovery? What if that was helpful? And that kind of set him on the journey of learning more about our neurology and discovering that all mammals tremble after a trauma. And he started to wonder if we could help the body remember that trembling and shaking, would it have benefit to the organism? And out of that came TRE. TRE is a self-help tool, and it is being taught right now in about 65 countries, and there are millions of people globally that are practicing TRE. It is much more well-known in other parts of the world. It is less well-known in the US, and honestly, it has become kind of my passion to educate and hopefully have it become much more well-known. So where I'm going to start is some neurology that relates to TRE. As an organism, we pulsate. So we have a vibration that occurs within our bodies all the time. Primarily, it comes from our heart and from our breath. But we also have gastrointestinal peristalsis that is a pulsation as well. So at rest, there is a rhythm to this. When we begin to feel threatened, then the pulsations increase. So heart rate increases, breathing increases. And if we're under significant threat, then actually there is a freeze response that occurs that starts to shut down our pulsation. In the past, we only thought of the activation as fight or flight, and now we're starting to understand that freeze is on that continuum as well. The tremor mechanism of TRE helps to downregulate the overcharge of fight or flight, or if an organism has gone into freeze, it seems to be reinitiating the pulsation so that it can return to that normal state. The brain, in a very simplistic way, is divided into 3 parts. So we have the neocortex, which we consider to be the human brain. So it is the part of us that is rational, logical, creative, has imagination, can generate options, evaluate options, and determine a course of action. We also have a limbic system, which is often called the mammalian brain, and it is more of our fight or flight survival system, as well as basic emotions. And then the brainstem, considered the reptilian brain. It is primarily instinctual. It is a lot of the things that we don't have to think about that continue to run within our body. Now we have influence over respiration, heart rate, even blood pressure. But when I'm not thinking about it, it will continue to go on its own, and that comes from the brainstem. All right, so keep that in mind, those 3 parts. The brain at ease. So when we feel safe, those 3 parts of the brain are interacting in a very fluid way. They are communicating with each other, we'll say, without any inhibition. So at ease, we're getting all kinds of input from around us, from our physical senses. Those things can be taken in and they're packaged, so to speak. So it's sent to other areas of the brain associated with memories and feelings. So let's take this circumstance. You're going to take in information from not only your environment, but from this presentation. And it's going to get associated with other times you've been wherever you are currently watching the video, as well as other times you've watched a video or watched a presentation. It's then packaged into a story that has a beginning, a middle, and very importantly, an end, okay? So there's this complete package. It then can go to another part of the brain to get filed, also equally very important. And the story is retrievable to a certain degree. It can be rerun as a movie. So if I were at a birthday party, I might have a file that said birthday parties, and I can go to it as needed and pull out my file of experiences in birthday parties and run it as a movie. When we begin to experience stress and tension, it's important to understand that stress and tension is a very appropriate response to both internal and external experiences, right? So I can have stress coming from perhaps a deadline, but I can also have stress and tension come from my imagination if I am creating a disaster scenario. The muscle tensions that are the result of these difficult or physical experiences in life, it's a temporary change that's necessary for us. So we get these deep muscle contractions that are designed to protect our body from harm and even death. So we contract in the same way that Dr. Berceli was describing in a bomb shelter. It's just to a lesser degree. So I don't have that sense of a quick contraction, but I jokingly say there are times that I feel like I can feel my shoulders rising up to my ears in terms of the tension in my upper body. The chemicals being released are the same ones that are released if a lion were running at me. It's just at a lower level. So I'm going to have norepinephrine, adrenaline, cortisol beginning to come into my system. Tension to me is like having a horror movie soundtrack running in the background. So if you were in a movie theater and you started to hear this music, you start to tense. And for most of us, we start looking around the screen trying to figure out where's the danger going to come from. The body is designed to create that tension, but then also to discharge it. And if it's a lion, or let's say in the movie theater, something jumps out, I have a physical reaction that does use some of those chemicals. If, however, it's something like a dead lion, I may not have the opportunity to truly discharge them and return to that calm, settled body at ease. That's really important, okay? What I also want you to notice is it wasn't difficult to continue to hear me when that horror movie soundtrack is going on in the background. You can kind of override it, which is what most of us do with our stress and tension, which is why we don't often notice that our shoulders are getting tense or our back until that tension has become very severe. However, when our system goes to what I call a red alert, it's more like this. And I am going to talk through this because I want you to try to understand the difference. A traumatic reaction is a positive response, not a negative, okay? But it's an instant on. It's an overwhelming arousal of the fight, flight, freeze mechanism. The HPA axis and the limbic system becomes supercharged. The HPA is the hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal glands. And the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system become primed for big action. I'll turn it off. It's very annoying. It's also really hard, if you are in this overwhelming arousal, it's very hard to ignore it. It is overwhelming and takes front and center. But it is meant to be survival. So data is taken in fragments and stored in sensory parts of the brain. I want you to hold on to that. That's super important. Stored in sensory parts of the brain. And here's why. Oops, so sorry. All right. When we go into that hyperarousal, the instant on, all of our systems are impacted. So I want you to really think about this. A lion is running at me. Heart and lungs become activated. So remember back to the pulsation, how we said if under threat, the pulsation increases. So heart and lungs begin to increase. I am going to need oxygen and blood supply in order to fight or run. My musculature becomes tightened. So again, I want you to think about why is that in my best interest? Well, the contraction helps me prepare for a big explosive action that's going to help me survive. So I'm going to run faster than I've ever run before. I'm going to physically be able to fight in a much stronger way than I would otherwise. That part of the system is what's responsible for people being able to do heroic things. Run for miles with a cut in their leg in order to get help. To lift a car off a loved one. My dad used to tell a story of being a probably elementary age child, and there was a fire at his farm. And he was able to lift buckets of water up over his head to his brothers so that they could then pour the water on the roof that was on fire. And he did it over and over and over again. But after the event, my dad couldn't lift that same bucket of water. His system had responded in a survival manner that allowed his muscles to work in a way that they could not normally work. Those things are pretty intuitive. We tend to understand that. However, what we don't typically recognize is in order for the body to send all of its energy to that survival, it's going to shut down other aspects of the system. If I am about to die, does it really matter if I process food? Probably not. So my gastrointestinal tract gets shut down. We have phrases for it that we, I think, in our culture think of as idioms. So we say things like, oh my gosh, I was so scared I about peed myself, or I was scared shitless. We don't mean it literally. However, under very high distress, that is literal. People void under that kind of distress because, again, the body says, if I'm about to die, don't worry about this. Get rid of it so that I don't have to think about it. The other systems that we don't need is our immune system and reproduction. So our immune system shuts down. Doesn't matter if a virus invades, if I'm going to get eaten by the lion. And the last thing I'm thinking about is reproducing my species when I'm about to get eaten. All of those things ultimately sound pretty reasonable. When I start to say, but your thinking brain goes offline, I often get this very puzzled look. The thinking brain is what is responsible for generating options, evaluating options, deciding a course of action. So let's think about the lion running at me. If my thinking brain is available, I might be saying to myself, wow, that's a really big lion. Boy, I got to get out of here. I think I saw some people over here who might be able to help me, but I also saw a house not too far away. Maybe I could get to there faster. Okay. Before I've had a chance to generate all my options and decide a course of action, I'm dead. The lion has already attacked me. So we have been designed so that the thinking brain is shut off. Access to it is shut off. The limbic system and the brain stem are taking over. And that is so that I can survive. But it is meant to be short term. I'm supposed to have this system activate, shut down my cortex, hyperactivate the limbic system and the brain stem, and bypass that executive functioning, okay? And then when I have survived, I have a natural mechanism of trembling and shaking to either discharge the built-up chemicals that I didn't use, or if I have gone into a freeze response, a preparation for death, or a play dead and hope the predator leaves me alone, the trembling is to bring my system back online and ultimately to relax and return to a relaxed ready, which means heart and lungs settle down, my muscles soften, and those other systems that went offline come back online, which also means that when my cognitive function comes back online, I'm more able to then process what's occurred to me so that those data fragments get put together, the story gets put together, it gets filed as finished. And that's very, very important. All right. I want to deepen your understanding using polyvagal theory about what's occurring as we're responding to stress and tension, because that informs us about what is needed to help people who are stuck either in that tense, stressful, what I've called the horror movie soundtrack, or they're stuck somehow in the hyperarousal or freeze response. Stephen Porges is credited with developing polyvagal theory. And we have to start with an understanding that the vagus nerve is your 10th cranial nerve. It is the longest nerve system in the body. And it comprises about 80% or more of the afferent signals. So afferent is coming from the body back to the brain. So the vagus nerve is connected to all of our muscles, our organs, systems, and information from that is coming back to the brain through the vagus nerve. Originally, our understanding of the autonomic nervous system is it was divided into these two parts: sympathetic, which was the mobilization, right, for fight or flight, or the parasympathetic, which was rest, digest, calm. It's also what allows us to connect with each other, because I can only do that well if I feel safe and secure. Dr. Porges proposed that there are actually two branches of the parasympathetic. He said what he called ventral vagal is what we originally understood. It is the rest, digest, social engagement aspect of the parasympathetic system. He proposes that there is a second branch of the vagus nerve that he called the dorsal vagal system. And he believes that that is what is responsible for the freeze or immobilization response. So it is an extreme response of the parasympathetic nervous system. And that's important. We used to think just fight or flight and then rest, digest. Now we understand fight, flight, freeze is part of the system. We tend to respond to things in order of our development. So we're going to start with the most complex, which is social engagement. I'm going to first try to survive using my rest and calm and connection to be able to survive whatever's in front of me. Interesting to me, the parasympathetic is also what's responsible for my facial expressions, my tone of voice, those things which are part of our connection to one another. But if that's not working, I'm very likely to first start with trying to run from whatever the threat is. And again, if that doesn't work, then I'm going to turn to fight for my life, right? Both of these are still from the perspective of I can do something. My system is activated. If neither of those is going to work, I drop into an I can't. And the body begins to conserve energy and numbs the body with endorphins. I'm fascinated by this. It can be twofold. One is I can, in a sense, feign death in hopes that the predator will become disinterested and leave me alone. The other is if I am truly going to die, it is preparing my body to do that. And the numbing is to deal with the pain. Again, go back to the lion. Awesome if it's a lion. For many people, what they face is not a lion. It is the chronic abuse or a domestic violence, sexual assault. For our first responders, it's witnessing horrific things, or our military folks. And they can go into a freeze response where their system is still operating. They can move and function, but they have disconnected from themselves physically, from themselves emotionally, and often from their thoughts as well. So there is this numbing of their systems. So I want to show you, I'm going to make sure I'm where I think I am. Okay, so I'm going to stop my share of the screen here for a moment so that I can choose a video that I'd like you to see. And what I'm going to tell you is that for some of you, this could be upsetting. So be aware of that. It is only about a minute. It is of an impala that has been attacked by a cheetah. And what I like about this video, first of all, it's not going to show it being chased, but we know it has been. But what I want you to see is the freeze response in action, and then watching the natural mechanism of survival. To me, the impala looks dead. The cheetah has it pinned, and I don't know why the cheetah leaves. No idea. But if you look, it's hard to believe that this animal is alive. And yet, It begins to breathe deeply, so the systems are coming back online. And when it comes out of this freeze, it's going to drop into fight or flight. So it is behaving as it did before it gave up. And now it's shaking and trembling. And ultimately, it's able to get up and go, which is truly remarkable. That is what our system is meant to do. Another way to look at this is a curve. The polyvagal curve shows this same process, all right? So I start theoretically in ventral vagal in a rest, calm, settled place. And life happens. So I get irritated, frustrated. I kind of come up into a certain amount of fight or flight. And if I'm doing well, then I might be able to bring myself back down. If it's significant threat, then I climb the polyvagal curve. So it's getting more intense into that fight or flight. The top of the curve is panic and rage, so very intense level of threat and my activation. Again, if I don't think that's going to work, I tip over into freeze, into an I can't. And you see that here in the freeze response. The curve, this picture isn't perfect in the sense that at any point, you can come back down the curve to come back into ventral vagal. What I want you to see though is when someone is here in freeze, where they come down into first is into the top of the fight or flight to very strong emotions. If they can come through it into some self-regulation, they will come back here into ventral vagal. What we see with folks who have significant PTSD, when they come out of freeze and drop into the top of fight or flight, they call it being triggered, which is probably fairly accurate. A data fragment has been touched and they are experiencing the past in the present. So their response to whatever's occurring is far bigger than is necessary. They're not dropping into fight or flight because their life is truly threatened, but they scare the heck out of themselves, all right? And so they jerk themselves back up into freeze, only to be triggered and drop into the top, pull themselves back out. We think of this cycle as very re-traumatizing. And the way people talk about it is they say, I feel crazy. And this accounts for a lot of substance abuse. I think this is part of what accounts for military folks signing up to go back into high conflict zones, because then their reactivity makes sense to them. Whereas here at home, it doesn't make sense, and it doesn't make sense to their loved ones. What is important right here is how we support them through this intensity. And initially, they cannot self-regulate. So we call it co-regulation. They need another person socially engaged that is able to maintain the calm, which we know as therapists. We maintain the space to create safety so that they can feel and not pull themselves back into freeze. What I tell people is they've got to come down in here and not reactively pull up. They're going to touch in, and yes, they are going to pull back because they're not going to be able to come all the way through. But each time they can come deeper and learn that they can tolerate it and slowly come down this curve and begin to trust their own self-regulation. That's very important because we haven't had very good tools to help them do that. As a result, we see a lot of unhealed stress, tension, and trauma. The instinctual brain, so that separation where the cortex is shut off and limbic system and brainstem are in charge, helps us survive. If it stays stuck, though, then I want you to think about, if my system is primed because it believes I am in danger, then I'm constantly hypervigilant in my environment for where is the threat coming from, because everything in my body tells me I'm being threatened. It sets up for me to misinterpret all kinds of cues. So if my system is saying, I'm about to die, I might say, oh, is it that person's look on their face? Was it that tone of voice? Was it the person who walked by me and didn't say anything? All of a sudden, I'm primed to interpret my environment as threatening because my internal system is telling me I'm being threatened. It can lead to very impulsive, even violent behaviors, lots of anxiety, lots of depression, increases the likelihood of substance abuse because it's hard to tolerate living at that level of distress, or even the level of numbness. Substance abuse comes along. We know that if our system stays under pressure like that for an extended period of time, systems start to fail. We start to have a lot of stress-related illnesses. And all of you have undoubtedly heard the statistics that stress-related illnesses are the #1 reason people go to the doctor. All of those behaviors have been termed the personality of trauma. We think that it influences not only individuals, but cultural changes. We look at our world today, and certainly in America, we've lived the level of tension, stress, and trauma that are prevalent in our society and can lead to a lot of domestic and social violence. So what's to do? Bessel van der Kolk wrote the book, The Body Keeps the Score. Wonderful book if you haven't read it. He says the imprint of trauma, this is really important, the imprint occurs in the reptilian brain, in the brainstem, not the cortex. We need treatment that addresses the primitive parts of the brain as well as the cognitive parts. My clients who have trauma, they cognitively understand that trauma is over. They're not still being abused. They're not still in a war zone. And yet their system is still responding as though it is, and they cannot think their way out of it. That brainstem, however, is not independent of the cortex. So part of what we're trying to do is settle the nervous system and getting that cognitive brain online to begin to strengthen so that we stay at that parasympathetic place, and that it takes more to set me into fight or flight or freeze. And what I mean by takes more, they become hypersensitive. So even a small brush of their system sets off the larger response. That if I can strengthen their cortex again and calm their nervous system, then the brush of threat might rise them into, what's going on here? But their cortex is still online, and that is super important. It takes more to punch that button to set off fight or flight. And that's part of the goal, is to be able to respond appropriately to my environment, not reactively. Okay, let me make sure I'm where I want to be. Okay, so in terms of common treatment, we have had limited resources, but some good ones. Medication. Medication has been very helpful, and we know we've just recently added prazosin into the medication that helps with the nightmares that come with PTSD. Talk therapy. We've done a lot of different forms of talk therapy that have had some level of value. We added EMDR, thought field therapy, TIR, again, all very good adjuncts to our talk therapy. Biofeedback has a lot of value. And the new kid on the block is somatic experiencing with Peter Levine. What I want you to understand is what some of the limitations are here. All of these require financial resources. For many people, they cannot access this without health insurance. And so, now what? It's also difficult to deploy in large-scale disasters. When 9/11 occurred, a lot of therapists took a turn going to New York and working with the population. The advantage, we are a large country. For the most part, the majority of people speak English. So we were able to deploy to New York. We're not very far from Haiti. When Haiti was hit by the hurricanes and was decimated, we could deploy, but we didn't have enough French-speaking therapists to make a difference. It was very difficult to deploy into that area and into rural areas as well. Even here in the US, if you live in a rural area, you may not have anyone trained in somatic experiencing, EMDR, or you may have to travel a fair distance, which means, again, you have to have financial resources and you have to have a vehicle or be able to get on transit. So there are some very serious limitations with the kinds of common treatment we have. All very good. So please hear me say that. I am a licensed mental health counselor. I use talk therapy. I do body integrated psychotherapy. I refer for EMDR. I refer for medication management. So I'm not discounting any of those things. I'm simply identifying there are limitations to this. The beauty of TRE is it is 7 simple exercises. Basically, the vast majority of people can learn the exercises and remember them. It can be tailored to a person's level of fitness. So very diversified bodies are still able to use TRE. TRE focuses on what's called the 3 musketeers, the psoas, the iliacus, and the diaphragm. Those 3 muscles are the muscles of contraction. This is really important to understand, okay? Those 3 muscles stand guard. They are protecting the center of gravity and are located in the front of the spine. TRE reawakens the shaking and tremoring that is natural to the body. Something to recognize in our profession, in psychology, we've acknowledged that shaking and tremoring are part of several disorders. However, we've looked at it as an indication of the pathology, a part of it, as opposed to, yes, in panic disorder, the system is hypercharged, or generalized anxiety disorder, hypercharged, or in PTSD, it can be a reflection of the hypercharge or of the freeze response trying to break through into back to a parasympathetic. But we've seen it as pathology, as opposed to it is the body trying to use its own natural healing to bring the body back to balance. TRE is activating this mechanism. And it's an opportunity to move out of thinking my way out of it into being. It is a reconnection with my body, with my emotions, and with my thinking. Okay, so it's trying to bring together all 3, which I think is very important. Over time, and this is important, TRE is not a one and done. Over time, it can deactivate that chronic red alert in the limbic system. Deactivation is not the same as disabling. We're never trying to disable my safety system. We're simply trying to get it to respond appropriately and not be stuck in this hyperarousal or freeze response. But TRE is not a replacement for therapy. Please, please hear me say that. It is not the end-all be-all. It is not for everyone, but it is a fabulous adjunct to therapy. So I'm going to show you another video, and this is of Dr. Berceli working with a gentleman who is a refugee from Afghanistan. So the first thing I want you to see is the tremoring in this initial position, and then I want you to see how we adjust TRE and work with this organism and body. So you can see the tremoring. This is common as a gateway. This is how the tremors often start in the body.
Peggy, I'm going to pause you there because I can't
see the video. Relaxed. Go to rest. This is a rest position.
Oh, Peggy, can you hear me? I can't see the video on my screen.
Oh.
Yeah.
Sharing.
It's just a blank screen.
Forward. Okay. Hold on just a moment. We back this up. Okay, let me stop the share. It says that it is sharing, so let me try again.
There we go. I can see it now.
Perfect. Okay,
Perfect.
So
great.
Here we go.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Shannon. All right. So where we're going to start is he's working with a refugee from Afghanistan. And what you're seeing here initially is the tremors in the legs. And that is a very common place for the tremors to begin. And then Dr. Berceli asks him to straighten his legs and rest. So he's taking a break. Part of what he's looking for is he's watching where he is on the polyvagal curve. And now what you're starting to see, look at his feet.
I don't need it so big. I just released his neck, and now this is how it's pulsating naturally. This is better. Okay? Like his quadricep muscles are moving here and not up here. So I want to feel his quadricep muscles to see what's going on down here. Okay? And look how strong it is. Okay, so I'm pushing it to the muscle where I think it's originating.
And watch his upper body.
Notice how me. A lot of movement in his feet, which is different than the movement with the legs. And there we go. All right, so now there's some sort of release happening. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold these legs a little bit, and I'm going to inhibit the movement down there and see if we can move it up the body.
So what you're hearing Dr. Berceli do is we've activated the neurogenic tremor. So you can see he's not in a stress position. He's in a neutral, and his body is naturally tremoring. And he's simply creating an intervention to help the entire organism begin to pulsate naturally.
Why does he and we can guess from who he is why that reason would be. Okay?
So what I would propose to you is he is coming out of freeze, and you can see that the legs are moving as though they are running or fighting. And then watch his shoulders. His body is starting to come back online.
Which is going to restore symmetry back in the structure. But the excited charge, probably the terror, is down in the
Did you hear him? The terror is in the legs. But he has him look at him, right? He's asking, is he okay? Because what he's looking for is he dissociating from the tremor? If so, we would have him rest and wait. Because again, he'd be coming into the top of the sympathetic. And we want him to be able to stay connected
now we put the whole structure together.
You can see the movement from head to toe. The whole organism is starting to pulsate, which is remarkable that he is releasing old muscle memory. And it's not necessary for him to tell us his story in order for him to experience relief. Now, if his story rises within him, then he would talk to a therapist and process it cognitively, but it would be part of it coming up naturally, and he's now hopefully more present to it. All of us have experienced our clients who will tell us a horrific story and they're flat. They are not connected to it in any way. TRE helps them begin to be connected and process it in a very integrated whole way. So let me go back to sharing my screen with my PowerPoint. And Shannon, can you see this?
Yep, it's perfect.
Okay, all right. So here's some of the major advantages that I see that TRE has as an adjunct. It is easy to tailor to a person's ability and fitness level. My mentor is a physiotherapist and yoga master and teacher, and she would describe that she works with what she calls diversified bodies. So I have watched her work with amputees. I have watched her work with people with very serious illnesses, diseases that limit their movement. And she is able to still target the muscles that need to be activated through the exercises. We can modify it. Now, interestingly, you can also have someone who's extremely flexible or strong, and we have to have a way to target the muscles so that they're not doing the exercises for 45 minutes in order to reach the tremor mechanism. And there is a way to adjust the exercises to do that. There really are no language or education barriers. So I could theoretically teach someone who doesn't speak my language simply by them watching and following what I'm doing. And partly that's what you saw with Dr. Berceli. He does not speak that gentleman's language. Now, he did use a word or two, like breathe, that obviously he knew, but he was not speaking to him in his language and using words to communicate what he was wanting to do or how he was helping him. Part of why I really love TRE is it is empowering of the person to begin to participate fully in their own healing. They're not entirely dependent upon a professional. They can begin to learn to self-regulate and use TRE on an ongoing discipline basis, 2 to 3 times a week. They don't have to keep checking in with me when they're using TRE. It can be taught in large groups, which is totally cool. So it could be taught like a yoga class, but it can also be taught with hundreds of people. I've seen video of Dr. Berceli doing this. It can also be used preventively. So personally, I don't have any horrific traumas in my history, thankfully. But obviously I live in the world, and boy, I have plenty of stress and tension. So I use TRE 2 to 3 times a week to continue to downregulate my system to be able to stay calm and present through whatever life throws at me, including the craziness of COVID-19. I think it's really important to acknowledge that TRE is a neurophysiological process. It is not associated with any particular belief system. So it can be used anywhere in the world without coming into conflict with a particular belief system. People are capable then of using this process, and they can ascribe interpretation to what's occurring through their own values and belief system. So it is a very culturally sensitive type of intervention. There are some cautions. What I've learned through the years is people approach TRE the same way they approach life. So if they are a driven to a goal person, and I just experienced this yesterday in my office, I specifically said to this person who I know has a trauma history, I want you to pay attention to your emotional responses while we're doing TRE. If you begin to feel an intensity of emotion, any emotion, above a 3 on a 10-point scale, I want you to tell me, and we're going to just take a rest. Okay. Did she do that? Nope. And I was watching carefully, and I kept checking in. Where are you on this 10-point scale? How are you doing? What are you observing? What are you noticing in yourself? And then her eyes got really big, and she said, I need to stop. I said, okay, what's going on? She said, I feel extremely vulnerable. Okay, where are you on the 10-point scale? She said, I'm a 6. And we both laughed. And she rested so that she could come back down the curve before we continued. It's equally common that if somebody has learned to essentially give up, they will also give up very quickly in TRE. And so I have to coach them in a different way, right? I have to say to them, it's okay. Can you hang in there one more second? Can you do that exercise just one more time? So that I'm beginning to help them recognize their own resilience, their strength, grow their ability to tolerate physical sensation, not discomfort, sensation, to tolerate a level of emotion. If they've numbed out and they tend to quit, then I'm engaging them in a new way. The other thing I've learned is I tell people very straightforwardly, just because you can do the exercises and follow the sequence does not mean you should be teaching other people. The tremor mechanism is very simple. It's very simple. It's very easy to access for the most part. What's not simple is I don't know how your organism is going to respond to the tremor. So it is helpful to work with a practitioner for anywhere from 3 to maybe 6 times to be sure that you know how to regulate your process. And that takes some coaching, especially for the people coming out of freeze and into the intense emotions. They need a practitioner's support to understand that they're safe, that they can stop the process. You can't willfully stop the tremoring. So you can't just say stop and it stopped, but you can change position and make the tremors stop. And you can rest. There's no reason to be driven to a goal because it's not a one and done. Also, for people coming out of freeze, they do need to co-regulate with a provider for a period of time until they begin to be able to self-regulate, to be able to recognize, okay, I'm rising above a 3 on that polyvagal curve, and I need to stretch out and just rest here until I settle, and then I can come back to the tremor. Again, I love TRE. It is a wonderful, wonderful adjunct, and I encourage you to do some research. The main website is traumaprevention.com. You can look for certified providers in your area. It's been really disappointing to me in Florida that I'm it for Northeast Florida all the way over to Tallahassee. And the folks in Tallahassee, one of them has retired. If you go south, as best I know, there's not anyone in the Central Florida area until you get over to Tampa and until you get down into the Boca Raton area. What I don't know is how much those folks are still using TRE either. So my goal is to introduce it to you, hopefully get you excited about the possibilities around TRE. There are trainings and workshops, lots of them online now through the Trauma Prevention website. Dr. Berceli has a YouTube channel, and it has interviews with other professionals, lots of videos of people tremoring that he's worked with. And so I encourage you to explore his channel. The other thing I want to offer to you is I am very willing to take you through the TRE process. I can do that over video for you to experience what it's like in your own body and to have a lived experience of what that neurogenic tremor feels like. Not too long ago, I did this with another professional, and she laughed with me that she was surprised that through the process, she started to feel vulnerable. And we talked about that was natural and that she was living what clients often experience. About a year ago, I did a training in Jacksonville with all mental health professionals. This group was entirely mental health professionals, and there was about 60 people in the room. And I was stunned because I did ask for some information before they attended, and easily 80% of the people attending all had identifiable big traumas. So we talked about that as they went through the process. And just recently I had the opportunity to talk to someone who had been in that training, and she talked about releasing some trauma from a surgery that she had had years ago. And she was quite surprised by it, that she actually experienced some physical pain in the TRE tremoring that she knew was related to the surgery, and that she afterward says that she can physically move better. It's as though it released whatever she'd been holding in her surgery sites, so that she has more flexibility in movement. So that was pretty cool. So again, thank you so much for letting me be part of your CEU process and letting me introduce you to this program. If you have questions for me, I've put my email. You are more than welcome to email me as well. So I'm going to stop my share. And thank you again for letting me be part of this.
Thank you so much, Peggy. That was such an informative and incredible presentation. As you mentioned, I think that this is really not a widely known, method of, integrating with our therapies using that TRE. And so that was so exciting to learn about, and especially learning about how applicable it can be across cultures and locations and really accessible. I know you said that your goal was to get people excited about TRE, and you've certainly achieved that here with me. So.
Oh, well, good. Then I've accomplished a little bit by getting you excited, and hopefully some other folks will be excited as well.
Yes, I appreciate it. And thank you to our viewers as well. Please keep in mind that if you're interested in accruing continuing education units for your viewing of this presentation, don't forget to complete that survey, which will be sent to your email as long as you've pre-registered by November 20th of 2020 for this event. And you can go to mhccf.com for details. And as a reminder, members can access this webinar presentation through the end of 2020. We look forward to sharing information about our New Year's presentation soon, and Mhccf wishes each of you happy and healthy holidays, and we will see you in 2021. Bye-bye.
Bye.